Hi, this is Sue again. I'm 62 years old and I drove cross country in my Ford Transit Connect. Can you believe I was on the road for 7 months? This was the trip of a lifetime. I never thought I'd be doing something like this, but here I am. I drove all the way from New Hampshire to Florida, over to California, up to Alaska, and back home. In this video, I'm going to break down my trip, show you the places that I went, and how I made my route. After all, it's the journey in life, not the destinations that count. This trip was long, so I'm going to go over it with you in separate segments. First thing I do when I'm planning a trip is I open up Microsoft Excel and create a spreadsheet. I add columns for date, weekday, notes, destinations, drive time, and addresses/GPS coordinates. I start by adding my basic destinations. I resource recreation.gov for points of interest. I can get a visual of where they are and add them to my spreadsheet. I use Google Maps to plot my destinations and assess my course. From here I can assess my drive time and assess where I need overnights. When you click details of the route, you can see time between drive destinations. I use iOverlander to pick safe and accessible overnights. In iOverlander, you can see the details of the route, GPS coordinates, and a brief description and some pictures of the place that other people have assessed. And this is how my spreadsheet starts to be filled out. My drive time, GPS coordinates and notes, my days and my dates. This particular road trip ended up being over 8 pages. This is my 5th road trip, and this method works for me pretty well. I don't keep to the spreadsheet exactly. Things come up. Sometimes I get sick, sometimes I spend less time at a place that I want to stay, and sometimes I spend more time. So this is my jaunt down the East Coast. I visited mostly family and friends overnight. Just to note, I do plot boondocking sites with iOverlander ahead of time just to estimate my drive time for the day. I may or may not stay at the ones I have identified depending on my comfort level with the site or the day's activities. Some parts of Florida have ordinances that you cannot sleep in your car. Definitely pay attention to signs and don't stay on private property of businesses without permission. I'd like to take a second and talk about my trip journal. I record where I started the day, where I ended the day, how many miles I drove, and any particular activities I did. I have a hard time journaling, so this is why I only really do bare bones recording. It's proved to be useful when I look back and need information. Driving across the Southwest, I had a few stops I wanted to make, noted in orange: Hot Springs National Park and Joshua Tree National Park. It was several days between them, so I needed to add a number of boondocking overnights, noted in blue. My first stop heading west was Crystal River. I wanted to see the manatees. Sadly, April 1st is too late to see the manatees as they harbor there during the winter months, so I moved on and had a good overnight at Cracker Barrel in Dothan, Alabama. As I drove west, I started to get notifications on my phone that there were increasing tornado and flood warnings at Hot Springs National Park. It quickly turned from this to this. I stopped short of my destination, Hot Springs National Park, and pulled in at a Cracker Barrel for the overnight in Jackson, Mississippi to wait out the storm and plan my next move. Plans shifted gears, and my friend and I rented a cabin in Philadelphia, Mississippi for a few days to wait out the storm. Or so I thought. I got this tornado notification in the middle of the night. So the tornado never happened, and the next day we moved on to Hot Springs National Park. 5 more spots, boondocking in Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and California before I reached my friend's home in Riverside, California. Up the West Coast, I had a hefty agenda. It was early May at this point, and some places ended up not being open, so I had to reroute my plans. After you calculate miles between destinations, always add a couple hours for stops for gas and eating, etc. My first stop after Riverside was to check out the Hollywood sign. And I was disappointed to pass up on Channel Island National Park because I could not get ferry tickets to line up with National Park camping. Heading up the coast of California, I visited Pinnacles National Park, Muir Woods National Monument, Point Reyes National Seashore, and Redwood National Park. I'm generally boondocking at public beaches, trailheads, and recreational areas, and some side roads between destinations. In Monterey, I boondocked for 5 days on a side road between a cemetery and a golf course, while spending my daytime hours parked at the beach, bicycling and walking the coast and watching the seals. I took a chance off the beaten path following a scenic drive sign, and I was glad that I did. It was fun driving the windy roads deep in the forest of the Avenue of the Giants. In Redwood National Park, you can drive right through the forest between the giant sequoias. On this portion of the trip, the plan was to travel from California to Utah to visit family and friends, then do a loop of the Southwest and back to Utah before heading to Alaska. We were supposed to tag Great Basin National Park, but the weather was not cooperating, so we decided to tag that one when I looped back around to Utah. So I hung out in Highland, Utah for a few days and then headed south to Kolob Canyon and to see a couple more friends. Then I went to Zion to ride the canyon. Biking in Zion Canyon. After I left Zion, there were a few boondocking days before I reached Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. I love the history of the Southwest and the scenery is breathtaking. Mesa Verde was very exciting. I hear getting tickets for that is hard, but when I was there in early spring, I did not have a problem. You can see ruins from the road in Mesa Verde, but if you take the tours, you can walk right into the structures. At Chimney Rock and Canyon of the Ancients National Monuments, you can see more ruins. At Great Sand Dunes National Park, it was cool to see the sand dunes, but that's not really my thing. Black Canyon of the Gunnison North and South was worth seeing the geological history unfold before your eyes. On the trip to Alaska, I only had 3 national parks picked out. It was going to be about 9 days of boondocking on the way in and on the way out, but I left plenty of time in my agenda to add adventures as we traveled. While I was in Highland, Utah, I visited Timpanogos Cave National Monument, then a couple days adventure to Great Basin National Park and on to Alaska. I boondocked at a rest stop and at Walmart before meeting my friend in Great Falls, Montana. From there, we started our adventure to Alaska. It was a few days before we reached Dawson City, Canada. There were notifications there that the Alaska Highway was closed at Fort Nelson due to wildfire activity. We drove as far as we could and joined 100 or so of our friends camped out at the side of the road for 3 days before they let us through. It was nighttime when they opened the road, and it was pretty eerie driving through the fire area. I was so excited to get to the Yukon. The vast wilderness and mountains and forests and rivers were amazing. We saw a number of bears and other wildlife, and I learned more about the gold rush traveling in this area. Finally made it to Alaska. We found some pretty interesting boondocking places along the way. Driving south to the coast of Alaska, we visited Denali National Park and Kenai Fords National Park. It was a surprise to me that the scenery along the coast was much more strikingly beautiful than inland. We drove to Chicken, Alaska, across the top of the World Highway, over to Dawson City in the Yukon. I took a person's advice and checked out Skagway on the way home. I boondocked on the way there and on the way back. I'm sure glad I did. It was beautiful. On through Stewart and Hyder, and then on to Terrace, BC, where some nice people told me about a free shower. Prince Rupert was a cute little scenic coastal town. Mount Robertson was the gateway to Jasper and Banff National Parks. Here it feels like a place where the mountains take center stage. Towering peaks of the Canadian Rockies rise sharply into the sky, their jagged edges often capped with snow, even in the summer. Dense forests of evergreen trees, spruce, pine, and fir blanket the lower slopes where the air feels fresh and clean. A quick stop in Calgary for a birthday breakfast and on to the States. So I made it back to Montana to meet my friend. By this time it was early July. We went on a week-long canoe trip down the Missouri River. From here, I temporarily started to travel with him in his truck camper on another loop of the Southwest. Aside from a wedding we were going to and meeting some friends for a bicycle tour, the last 3 months of my trip was unscripted and open-ended. We had about a week before we met with friends, so we decided to do a bunch of touring before we met them. The bike tour was in the San Juan Mountains. Biking in Colorado.
Biking in Colorado in the San Juans.
With Mona.
Suwana old-timers.
It's now September, and at this point my only need was to make it across the Rocky Mountains before it snowed, because they shut down the highway when the weather gets too bad. I had about 2 weeks before I wanted to pick up my van in Utah to make that final drive back east. Biking in Zion Canyon.
On the bike path in beautiful Zion in the morning.
With Mona. After stopping in Highland to pick up my van, we turned east and made the final 2 destination stops, one at the Oregon Trail ruts and the other one at Wind Cave National Park. As I said goodbye to the western frontier, I reflected on the open road, as I had no worries ahead of me and no cares behind me as I traveled into my last sunset. The final push is always the hardest. As you get back east, there aren't as many interesting or available boondocking spots. My last 2 stops were a Cracker Barrel in Iowa and an I-71 rest area just south of Cleveland. These last 2 days, I traveled about 600 miles each before I reached home. It's nice to be home. Now I have to start dealing with the realities of catching up from being gone for so long. I better get started. Well, thanks for watching and see you on the road.